Amid the stillness of the Wild West, suddenly, a herd of wild Mustang horses charged forward, surrounding the tour bus like a violent wave. The thunderous pounding of their hooves echoed through the air, and the panic that followed thickened the atmosphere, making it suffocating. What happens next will not only leave you stunned, but will also make you question reality. Is this really happening, or am I dreaming? But don't be mistaken, these horses aren't here just to spread chaos. They come as an unstoppable force, carrying with them an ultimate message, a warning that only those who are truly strong and sensitive enough can understand. A message from nature, as powerful as a storm about to sweep through, forcing everyone to face the truth no one wants to confront. Do you have the courage to face it? Let's begin the story right now. The first light of day bathed the Wild West in a golden glow. The sky was clear and bright, with no trace of clouds, covering an endless space where only the sound of wind rustling through lush green fields and the trickling of a nearby stream sparkled in the morning light. This land, with its pristine and untamed beauty, had always been a place that nature lovers dreamt of visiting. The group of tourists sat in the tour bus, leaning out the windows, their innocent smiles beaming as they eagerly awaited the special moment they had heard so much about, the Mustang herd, living symbols of freedom and power. The bus rolled down a winding dirt road, surrounded by endless stretches of grassy fields, distant mountain ranges that seemed to stretch into the horizon, forming a majestic landscape beyond words. This was the land where wild Mustang horses roamed free, a space so vast that they could run unhindered. The tourists, with their cameras ready, hoped to witness the beauty of these untamed creatures, living in harmony with nature. For most of them, this was one of their first experiences in the Wild West, and to them, it was more than just a typical sightseeing trip. They thought they would simply enjoy the beauty of nature, but they had no idea that this moment would become a part of their lives they would never forget. As the bus neared a curve on the road, the air suddenly grew heavy. This feeling wasn't because of the atmosphere outside, but because of a strange silence that slowly enveloped the bus. Everyone began to fall silent, their eyes searching for the familiar shapes of the wild horses. Cameras were poised, faces full of anticipation. But instead of seeing the familiar silhouettes of horses from afar, the tourists suddenly noticed something odd. The Mustang herd didn't just appear from the distance, they emerged from the very shadows of the wild, like ghosts from the West's memories. Leading them was a stallion, Astrius. Its sleek black coat shimmered under the sunlight, with a striking white blaze on its forehead, symbolizing power and strength. But the strangeness didn't just lie in their appearance. The horses didn't gallop into the field to run freely. Instead, they began to move closer to the bus, as if they had some purpose. Ethan Blackwood, the tour guide, maintained his composure. He was a tall, middle-aged man with dark hair turning gray. His sharp eyes and the deep lines on his face were the marks of someone who had lived a life full of unending adventures. Ethan had lived and worked here, guiding thousands of tourists through rugged paths, showing them the beauty of the wild. But today, something felt different. Ethan was no stranger to wild horses. He had spent his life protecting and understanding them. But today, the herd wasn't just a beautiful sight or a symbol of freedom. They were doing something that he couldn't explain. Looking into Astrius's dark, glossy eyes, he felt a strange connection, a silent communication. These horses weren't just there to catch attention, they were delivering a message, one that Ethan couldn't quite grasp. Although a sense of unease stirred in Ethan's heart, he tried to reassure the tourists. He couldn't let the fear spread. He knew well that these wild horses might be part of a much larger, more complex ecosystem that few people understood. Yet, within him, there was an unsettling feeling, a warning rising in his chest. One of the tourists, a blonde woman, stood up and asked, "Ethan, why are the horses coming so close to us? Could they be dangerous?" Ethan simply replied, "Don't worry, we're not in any danger. These horses aren't easily tamed. They have their own reasons. But even as he spoke, the worry he felt could not be hidden. This herd was different from any he had encountered before. Ethan thought about his past, the pain he had endured. He had once lost a beloved companion, one of the horses he cherished deeply. The loss had only deepened his bond with wild horses, and it was this deep connection that led him to dedicate his life to protecting them. But today, the horses were calling him, not with the simple call of nature, but with a signal that only those who truly understood horses could recognize. As Astrius and the herd surrounded the bus, a powerful sense of connection between nature and humanity surged within Ethan. A major question hung in the air: where do we fit into this story? Are we mere bystanders or true companions? But no one could answer that question right now. The tourists exchanged anxious glances, and tension filled the air with every passing moment. Something was unfolding, and it wasn't just about the horses. It was about a journey Ethan was about to embark on, one that would uncover secrets he had never imagined. With courage, a part of nature was calling for his help. And as always, Ethan would not ignore that call. But what happens next will not only leave you astonished but will make you question, are we witnessing a setup by nature, or is it a call from a wild world that only the bravest can hear? The natural landscape of the Wild West is something beyond imagination. The sky, an eternal blue dome with no cloud in sight, unfolds before the travelers like a giant canvas, with the morning light casting a gentle golden hue. The space is vast, as though there is no beginning and no end. The grasslands stretch endlessly, the solid earth covered in lush green grass and small patches of wildflowers, forming a beautiful, colorful carpet beneath the sunlight. Small streams wind through open patches of land, their crystal-clear waters shimmering, creating bright streaks like ribbons drawn across the cool, green backdrop of the earth and sky. The mountains stand tall like sentinels, rising high into the sky, enveloping the heavens. Each mountain is a milestone in history, a witness to time. These ranges are not only beautiful to behold, but also carry a grandeur and mystery that can only truly be felt when standing amidst the vastness of this wilderness. Far off, at the base of the mountains, winding trails curve like signs for those brave enough and patient enough to venture further. As the bus moves deeper into this wild land, the air seems to grow eerily still. All sounds seem to be swallowed by the enormity of nature. There is no sound from the bus engine, no chatter from the tourists. Only the wind rustling through the fields, the footsteps of nature, the gentle babble of the stream, and the soft breath of the wildlife around. One feeling fills the space, the grandeur of nature. The tourists sit in silence, their eyes fixed on the scene before them. Every detail, every piece of nature seems to be unfolding a mysterious story they could never have imagined. Each breath, each movement of nature seems to have its own rhythm, like a silent song that only those truly listening can understand. And in this moment, amidst the breathtaking picture, the tourists can feel the invisible connection between humans and nature, a relationship that anyone can understand, but very few can fully describe. Ethan knew that what they were witnessing was not just an ordinary sightseeing trip. This was a rare opportunity to experience a part of the wild that not everyone would easily encounter. With each story he shared, the tourists' eyes grew brighter, not just looking at a scene of nature, but immersing themselves in a living, breathing legend. "You see," Ethan began, his voice calm but filled with expectation, "the Mustang horses are not just ordinary horses. They are free creatures, symbols of ultimate strength and freedom. For hundreds of years, they've survived countless challenges in the wild, and they are an irreplaceable part of the story of the West." Each of Ethan's words is like a key unlocking a door to the legendary tales that have lived in the hearts of people from the West for generations. The Mustang horses have existed in the stories of Westerners for a long time, but right now, they are standing in front of the tourists, alive and more powerful than ever before. These horses are not just creatures of freedom, they are witnesses to time, to history, living marks of nature that humanity can only admire and learn from. Ethan continues, his voice full of admiration. The Mustang horses are the symbol of the Wild West. For hundreds of years, they've lived freely, unbound by anyone, and they will continue to live that way. In a way, these horses convey messages that we cannot fully comprehend. And today, you stand here, on this land, witnessing a part of their living story. The tourists sit in silence, listening intently. Each story Ethan tells makes them believe even more in the grandeur of nature, helping them feel the magic the Mustang herd brings. Vivid images of these wild horses running freely across the fields, overcoming nature's challenges, slowly emerge in their minds. The tourists' eyes grow wide with wonder, their hearts full of expectation. They are eager to see these powerful creatures, but they want more than just a visual encounter. They long to experience the absolute freedom that the Mustang horses represent. Ethan's stories have sparked an endless passion for the wild, and now they cannot wait for what's to come next. In front of them, the landscape seems to reveal a magical force, drawing them into a space they never dared dream of. And right now, as the Mustang herd approaches, the tourists feel that this is not just a sightseeing tour, but a journey to explore the essence of freedom, strength, and life in harmony with the wild. As the air remained eerily still, a sense of unease settled over the group, and just when they thought they could grasp the unfolding scene, something unexpected happened. The silence in the air suddenly became thick, like a mysterious veil enveloping everything. The tourists sat still, but inside, their emotions swirled up strongly. It was not just amazement they felt, but an indescribable sense of unease as the Mustang herd approached, slowly yet resolutely. Every eye was fixed on the distant blurry shapes beginning to emerge across the vast grasslands. At first, they appeared as fleeting dark spots, like morning mist. But the longer they looked, the clearer the herd became, strong and majestic. In just a few seconds, the sunlight broke through, highlighting the horses, especially the leading stallion, Astrius. Astrius's black coat glistened under the sun, with a white mark on its forehead, standing out like a distinct symbol amidst the wild. Its dark, deep eyes never left the bus, seemingly watching every tourist inside, every subtle movement. The other horses in the herd followed, walking powerfully yet never separating, moving together like a mighty army, symbols of strength and freedom. The tourists couldn't take their eyes off these wild creatures. They could feel the mystery and latent power in each step they took. Some were mesmerized, as if drawn into the vivid images that were hard to believe. But as the herd drew closer, unease began to spread. No one could predict what would happen next. A sudden sense of dread swept over the tourists as the horses approached, surrounding the bus like a fierce wave. Each step they took on the earth was punctuated by a steady, powerful sound, like punches to the air, that made the atmosphere heavy and tense. "What are they going to do next?" one tourist whispered, their voice trembling. "Could they attack us?" These words marked the beginning of an uncontrollable fear. The tourists sat motionless, eyes glued to the horses, as cold sweat trickled down their brows. Despite no clear sign that the horses intended to attack, the closeness of these powerful creatures made it impossible not to feel an overwhelming sense of fear. Ethan felt the tension building inside the bus, but he knew his role was to stay calm. Though he too was feeling some anxiety, he tried to maintain his composure, looking at each tourist sitting stiffly in their seat. He raised his hand, trying to convey reassurance. "We don't need to be afraid. These horses have no intention of attacking. They're here for a reason that only those who understand nature can perceive." However, despite Ethan's words, the tension in the air remained unshaken. This was no ordinary herd of wild horses. Astrius's gaze never left the bus, as if it were examining every movement inside, testing whether they were capable of understanding and respecting the existence of these majestic creatures. The Mustang herd moved closer, each step deliberate, neither hurried nor slow. Every step seemed to affirm their absolute freedom and power. Astrius led, followed by the other horses, forming a tight circle around the bus. The horses paused for a moment, their eyes fixed on the tourists, not in an aggressive manner but without the slightest hesitation. A few tourists began to feel a strange connection to the herd. It wasn't an impending threat, but a powerful sense of harmony between humanity and the wild. Still, this feeling left them confused, unable to explain what was happening. One tourist sitting near the window, hands trembling, softly exclaimed, "I feel like they're looking right through us." Ethan turned toward them, trying to reassure the group, "We are not a threat. These horses understand more about us than we can imagine. Stay calm, and let's try to understand what they're trying to communicate." The horses stood still for a long moment, and an eerie silence filled the space. A strange feeling of power and authority filled the air. It became clear that the herd had not come simply to be admired or to show off their freedom. They were carrying a message, something important that only those with a deep sensitivity could perceive. Astrius's gaze remained locked on the bus, as though testing whether the humans inside were capable of understanding the message they were sending. Then, as if on cue, Astrius began to stomp its hooves against the earth. The loud sound shattered the silence, and immediately, all the other horses in the herd followed suit. Each powerful stomp on the ground was like a call, a forceful message from nature itself. "They're trying to warn us about something," Ethan whispered, never taking his eyes off the herd. In that moment, though everything remained silent, the sense of fear among the tourists was still palpable. The air felt thick, as though the world around them had slowed down. What was truly happening here? And did they have the courage to face whatever was coming next? This extended version of Part 3 adds more depth to the narrative, building on the suspense and mystery of the Mustang herd's appearance. The tourists' growing fear and Ethan's attempts to calm them contrast with the wild power of the horses, creating a thrilling atmosphere as the herd closes in on the bus. The mysterious behavior of the horses and their sudden actions leave the tourists in a state of uncertainty, heightening the dramatic tension of the story. The herd of horses did not rush away as everyone had anticipated. Instead, they continued moving closer, slowly forming a complete circle around the bus. Astrius, the lead stallion, was at the forefront, its deep, dark eyes never leaving the bus. With each stomp of its hooves against the earth, the other horses followed suit in unison, creating a sound that reverberated through the vast open space. The sound was like a call, a wordless command, making the air around the bus feel heavy and tense. The tourists sat silently, each feeling the unusual nature of what was happening, but no one dared to ask or express their feelings. Their eyes were fixed on the herd of horses, unable to look away, caught between admiration and fear. They didn't know whether these horses had any intention of attacking or if they were simply performing an action with some deeper meaning that they couldn't understand. Although on the outside, Ethan still tried to maintain his composure and project confidence to the group of tourists. Internally, a sense of unease began to rise within him. He had guided many tours through wild territories before, but he had never witnessed such strange behavior from a herd of wild horses. Astrius, with its unwavering gaze, not only stared at the tourists but seemed to embody a unity, as if there was a perfect coordination among the horses in the herd. This was no coincidence. He sensed that the herd was doing something purposeful, and it wasn't just to attract attention or gaze at them. These horses seemed to be trying to convey a message, one that only those with deep understanding of horses and nature could truly perceive. This strange feeling overwhelmed Ethan. He felt that they didn't want to harm anyone, but it didn't seem like they were ready to leave either. Ethan couldn't help but feel the rising anxiety inside, but he understood that allowing fear to spread would only make everything worse. Taking a deep breath, he tried to stay calm and spoke to the tourists. "We don't need to panic. These horses don't want to harm us. But they are looking for a connection, some understanding. What they are doing may be part of a journey that they want us to join." However, despite his reassurance, the anxiety among the tourists could not be completely quelled. The way the herd was surrounding the bus, the way they refused to leave but continued to stay, made everyone feel as though they were trapped in a situation beyond their control. The herd, with Astrius leading, stood still, their eyes never straying from the bus, as if waiting for some kind of response from the humans inside. Though Ethan tried to reassure the group, the fear still lingered. The horses didn't just stay still, they occasionally moved even closer, increasingly surrounding the bus, forming a living circle. Every movement they made, each stomp of their hooves, each lift of their heads, seemed intentional. Especially when Astrius stood there, looking at the herd and then back at the bus, everyone started to feel a sense of contradiction, a strangeness they couldn't explain. "Are they trying to communicate with us?" a tourist whispered, feeling as though they wanted to get up but couldn't. That question seemed to reflect the collective fear of the group. They looked at each other, none daring to speak up, just feeling the oddness in the air. A sense of unease began to rise in Ethan's heart. He could feel that the herd was waiting for a response from them. The strong hoofbeats of Astrius were not attacks, but a silent message, a signal from nature that humans needed to listen to. The herd of horses stood still for a moment, as if contemplating something, then suddenly, one of the horses in the herd let out a loud whinny, causing the atmosphere to become even more suffocating. This whinny was not a normal call but had an urgent tone, as if the horses were calling for help or seeking acknowledgement from humanity. Astrius's gaze remained unchanging, firm, and powerful. The other horses seemed to be waiting for a signal, and all of them acted with a very clear purpose. The atmosphere at that moment could no longer simply be described as tense. Everyone in the bus could not predict what would happen next. The horses didn't leave, they showed no sign of retreating. No one dared to speak, no one dared to move. All eyes were fixed on Astrius, as if everyone was searching for a sign, a signal from the lead stallion, and the suspense, the worry, grew stronger. As the group was enveloped in tension, Ethan realized that this herd of horses wasn't just here to be admired or to show off their strength. They had come for a reason, one that only those with enough insight and understanding could truly perceive. Something monumental was unfolding, something beyond their comprehension. He felt that he needed to do something to resolve this situation. This was no longer just a tour, it had become a spiritual trial, a journey between man and nature that they had never imagined. As the tension reached its peak, with Astrius's unwavering gaze, everyone could sense that these horses were not here simply to cause panic. When Astrius stamped its hooves into the ground, an invisible shift in the atmosphere occurred. What would follow next would make them realize that this wasn't random, but an action with purpose and deep meaning. When Astrius, the lead stallion, struck its hooves hard against the earth, it wasn't just a simple action, but a powerful signal, almost like a call from nature. The sound of its hooves pounding the ground echoed through the vast wilderness, a sound that wasn't the random stomping of a horse looking for food or protecting its territory, but a coordinated effort. It was clear that there was a deliberate unity among the horses in the herd. The other horses immediately followed suit, each striking the ground with similar force. This wasn't the behavior of an ordinary wild herd, it was like a rehearsed performance, as if they were carrying out a special ritual. Every stomp of the hooves was like a specific note in a melody, clearly purposeful, like a symphony that only nature and wild creatures could feel. Ethan, who had lived alongside nature for years, began to realize that this wasn't a typical rehearsal. It was unlike any action he had witnessed during his entire career as a guide. It was a message, a clear signal from these horses. These rhythmic hoofbeats weren't acts of fear or anger, but a call from deep within their essence. Ethan stood still, observing every movement of Astrius and the herd. He couldn't deny one thing: these weren't wild horses mindlessly acting on instinct. They weren't showing signs of panic or confusion. Instead, their actions were highly purposeful, as if they were trying to send a special message to the people sitting in the bus. These horses weren't just displaying their power or dominance. The hoofbeats weren't acts of aggression or threats, but demonstrations of intelligence and wisdom that only those who truly understood horses and nature could perceive. It was a form of communication that was not easy for humans to grasp. In the wild, horses may not use human language, but they have signs, actions, and ways to convey messages clearly. These horses were trying to tell Ethan and the tourists something. Ethan felt that they weren't here to harm them but to communicate with him and the people on the bus. The strong hooves striking the ground weren't threats but an invitation to pay attention and understand. This was a call, a message from nature, asking humans to join in a journey that only those who can listen and understand will truly experience. The feeling that Ethan was experiencing wasn't just a connection with these horses. It was a connection between humans and nature, between mankind and the wilderness, a world that few people have access to. Since childhood, Ethan had been captivated by stories of the Mustang horses, the wild creatures that roamed free across vast plains, overcoming nature's challenges without restraint. But now, as he stood face to face with these horses, he truly understood that they weren't just creatures living freely, they were beings with deep knowledge and emotion. He sensed that this wasn't just a normal situation but part of a larger story that nature wanted him to be a part of. The herd of horses wasn't just a symbol of freedom and strength. They were guides, leading humans through a magical journey where understanding and love for nature could create a deeper connection to the natural world. Astrius, the lead stallion, was not just a leader but also the orchestrator of this communication between humans and horses. Its eyes never left the bus, and with every step it took, it seemed to be checking if the humans inside were capable of understanding the message they were trying to convey. Every sharp stamp of its hooves on the ground, every step taken by Astrius, had a purpose, a call for humans to understand nature in a deeper way. Even though Ethan didn't fully comprehend everything yet, he felt that every action of Astrius and the herd wasn't random. The stomping of hooves, the whinnies, all formed part of a perfect communication system that humans couldn't easily recognize. These were not simply actions of wild horses, but actions of intelligent beings with purpose, ready to connect with humans when the time was right. In that moment, Ethan realized this was an opportunity he couldn't miss. He wasn't just the guide anymore, he was now a participant in a grand journey, one that wasn't just his but also for everyone present, those witnessing the magic of nature unfold before them. Ethan turned to look at the tourists, who were sitting in silence, feeling the anxiety mixed with awe. He smiled, but the nervous excitement in his chest had never been stronger. We're not just passers-by. We are a part of this world, and today, nature is inviting us on a journey that only those who truly understand and feel its existence can witness, he said, his voice steady and full of assurance. At that very moment, Astrius and the herd remained there, as if they were waiting for Ethan and the tourists to acknowledge their presence. These horses weren't just wild animals, they were teachers, guides, ready to point out a path that nature had already laid out. In an instant, Ethan realized that what was about to happen was not just another step in his journey. They had brought him to the threshold of a profound change he couldn't have anticipated. Ethan stood at the edge of the bus, the doors swinging open with a creak that echoed through the stillness. The tension in the air was thick, like a heavy fog that surrounded them all. The herd's movements had not been hostile but purposeful, and Ethan's intuition screamed at him that there was more to this story than just a curious display of wild power. With a final glance at the nervous but expectant faces of the tourists, Ethan stepped off the bus, his boots making a soft crunch against the dirt. The horses, as if sensing his resolve, didn't move. They simply watched him. Astrius, the leader of the herd, still stood at the forefront, its gaze unflinching and unwavering. It was almost as if the stallion was waiting for him to make the first move. Ethan's heart raced with each step he took, but his mind was calm. His years of experience as a guide had taught him to trust his instincts, and something deep within him told him that the next step in this journey, this strange, mystical journey, was waiting for him beyond the herd. The horses weren't just leading him into the unknown, they were asking for his help, pulling him towards something far more profound than anyone could have anticipated. The sound of his footsteps seemed so faint against the vastness of the land, yet the wind carried a voice that Ethan could almost hear, urging him forward. With each step, the forest loomed ahead, its shadow stretching like a gateway to the wild heart of nature itself. The herd didn't follow him, but their presence was felt all around him. It was as if they were guiding him without words, waiting for him to understand that the next part of the story was his to uncover. Ethan's journey into the forest was not an easy one. The dense underbrush and uneven ground made every step a challenge, but his determination never wavered. He kept his eyes focused ahead, following the trail left by the herd, the deep hoof prints, the disturbed earth, the broken twigs. It didn't take long for him to realize that the path wasn't random. It was deliberate, as if the horses were telling him exactly where to go. The deeper he ventured, the more the forest seemed to come alive around him. Birds flitted through the trees, their calls echoing through the stillness, while the distant rustle of leaves whispered secrets of the land. The air was thick with the scent of earth and pine, and Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the forest's presence. It was ancient, full of stories that had yet to be told. And then, he saw it. At the edge of a small clearing, hidden among the tall grasses, lay a young foal. Its chestnut coat was matted with dirt and blood, its body trembling with exhaustion. The foal's small body was curled in a protective position, its injured leg bent at an unnatural angle. The sight of it struck Ethan with a cold wave of reality. This was why the herd had led him here. His heart tightened as he knelt beside the foal, his hand reaching out to gently touch its fur. The foal flinched at first, its dark eyes wide with fear, but there was a flicker of recognition in its gaze, as if it sensed that Ethan wasn't a threat. The creature's shallow breaths and the sharp, jagged edges of its injuries spoke volumes. Ethan could feel the pain in its body, and more importantly, he could feel its will to survive. The injuries were severe, deep gashes on the foal's side and a twisted, mangled leg that looked like it had been caught in something sharp. Ethan's mind raced. The foal had been separated from the herd, and somehow, it had found its way here. It was clear that it couldn't have survived for long without help. But it wasn't just the physical wounds that struck Ethan. It was the sheer vulnerability and desperation in the foal's eyes. This was no longer just an encounter between man and animal, it was a plea for help. The horses had led him here, trusting him with their own flesh and blood, and Ethan knew that he couldn't let them down. As he gently cradled the foal's head, a sense of deep responsibility washed over him. The herd had asked for his help, and now it was up to him to rise to the occasion. The foal's survival depended on him, and more than that, this moment, this encounter, felt like a turning point, a test of his connection with the wild, with nature itself. He carefully reached into his pack for his water bottle, offering it to the foal, knowing that even the smallest sip could make a difference. The foal hesitated, its eyes flicking between Ethan and the bottle, but after a few moments, it lowered its head and took the water, drinking slowly but steadily. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a moment of survival, it was a moment of trust. The foal, despite its fear and pain, was trusting him, just as the herd had trusted him. And in that trust, Ethan felt a deep, unspoken bond form between himself, the foal, and the land they both inhabited. Ethan knew that getting the foal back to the bus wouldn't be easy. It was injured, and moving it would be a challenge. But he also knew that if he didn't act, the foal wouldn't survive long in the wild. The herd had brought him here for a reason, to save the foal. And now, he had to find a way to help it. He gently cradled the foal's body, carefully lifting it as best as he could, trying not to disturb the delicate injuries. His muscles protested against the weight, but the bond he had formed with the foal gave him the strength to keep going. Every step he took felt like a fight against time. The forest seemed to close in on him as the path grew more difficult, but he pressed on. Each stride felt like an eternity, but the image of the foal's trusting eyes kept him going. Ethan knew that he couldn't let this little creature down, not after everything the herd had done to lead him here. This wasn't just about survival, it was about honoring the trust that had been placed in him by the wild, by the horses, and by the earth itself. As he moved forward, he could hear the distant sound of the bus's engine in the background, but the forest felt worlds away. Ethan's mind was clear, his focus narrowed to the task at hand. He had to save the foal. It was as simple and as complicated as that. In that moment, he realized that this wasn't just about rescuing an animal. It was about protecting a connection that went beyond words, beyond logic. It was about the shared understanding between humans and the wild, a connection that had been forged over thousands of years but had been forgotten by most. And now, standing in the forest with the foal in his arms, Ethan was about to rediscover that connection, a connection that would change him forever. Ethan knew that moving the foal back to the bus wasn't going to be easy, but he wasn't alone in this. As he slowly made his way back, he was joined by the tourists who, despite not being trained in animal care, were willing to lend a hand. They had witnessed the strange, mystical event that had unfolded before them, and now they were part of something far greater than they had ever expected. A few of the tourists, particularly those closest to the window, had been the first to rise from their seats, silently following Ethan as he gently cradled the foal. With a few soft words of encouragement from Ethan, they formed a human chain of support, each person doing their best to help without getting in the way. Some took turns carefully helping him lift the foal, while others offered reassuring words, trying to ease the tension in the air. Though none of them were equipped to handle an injured animal, their compassion and willingness to act spoke volumes. One of the women, her face etched with concern, reached into her bag and pulled out a blanket. "We need to keep it warm," she said softly, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. She gently wrapped the blanket around the foal, and as they moved, she walked beside them, offering quiet encouragement. A young man who had been standing nearby offered to keep an eye on the rest of the tourists, making sure that everyone remained calm and safe while they navigated the path. His presence helped ease Ethan's nerves as he felt the weight of the situation, the foal's injuries, the uncertainty of their journey back, and the growing sense of unity among the group. They were all in this together now, bound by a sense of purpose that transcended the normal boundaries of a tourist trip. The group moved forward, step by step, with Ethan leading the way. Despite the foal's trembling body and the challenges ahead, there was a quiet strength that had settled over them. The tourists were no longer passive observers, they were participants in something profound, something that would change them all. The journey back to the bus was long, and the path was far from easy. The forest, though beautiful and tranquil in its own way, was unforgiving. The undergrowth seemed to grow denser with each step, and the uneven terrain made it difficult for Ethan and the tourists to keep a steady pace. Every step he took felt heavier as he carried the foal, but he didn't dare stop. His muscles ached, and sweat dripped down his face, but he had no time to rest. The foal's fragile life depended on him. The wind had picked up, and the once peaceful forest seemed to shift, as if the land itself was testing him. The gentle rustling of the leaves grew louder, the sound of distant birds now a faint echo. Ethan's senses were on high alert. Every crunch of the forest floor beneath his boots seemed to be magnified, and the air felt thick with tension. Ethan could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The foal was in critical condition, and every second counted. He had no choice but to push forward, navigating the rough terrain while maintaining a delicate balance between the foal's safety and his own. But it wasn't just the physical challenges that weighed heavily on him, it was the mental strain. He couldn't help but think of the herd, the trust they had placed in him, and the responsibility that came with it. He wasn't just carrying a foal, he was carrying their hope. The tourists, though nervous, stayed close, providing support when needed. Ethan found himself constantly reassuring them, though he wasn't entirely sure that he was reassuring himself. Each moment felt like a test, a trial that he wasn't sure he was ready for. Yet, despite the doubts and the fears, there was a part of him that felt certain they could make it back to the bus. The foal's survival, the trust of the horses, and the bond they had formed with nature, it all seemed to align in a way that gave him strength when he needed it most. As they approached a particularly tricky section of the path, a steep incline with loose rocks and thick branches, Ethan paused for a moment, assessing the situation. He knew the foal wouldn't be able to make it up without help. He motioned for the tourists to stay back for a moment and, with great care, adjusted his grip on the foal. The air was still, the forest holding its breath, and for a brief moment, Ethan felt as though time had stopped. With the help of the young man who had been assisting him earlier, they carefully navigated the incline, lifting the foal just enough to get it over the rough patches of ground. The tension in the air was palpable, but Ethan could sense that they were close. The path ahead was still treacherous, but they had overcome the most challenging part of the journey. As they neared the clearing where the bus was parked, Ethan could hear the hum of the engine, a reassuring sound that reminded him they were almost there. Finally, the clearing appeared ahead, and with it, the sight of the bus. The tourists, exhausted but determined, followed Ethan as they approached the vehicle. He could see the relief on their faces, but there was no time to waste. The foal's journey was far from over, and Ethan knew that getting it to safety was just the first step. They arrived at the bus, and the tourists helped Ethan carefully place the foal inside, where they had prepared a makeshift bed using blankets. The gentle hum of the bus's engine seemed to soothe the foal as it lay there, still trembling but alive. Ethan collapsed into a seat, his body aching with exhaustion, but a sense of quiet satisfaction washed over him. He had done it. He had fulfilled the trust that the horses and the foal had placed in him. But even as he sat there, catching his breath, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The connection he had felt with the wild, with the herd, and with the foal was something deeper than he had ever imagined. And as the bus began to move, taking them away from the forest and back toward civilization, Ethan knew that the journey had changed him forever. In the silence that followed, he couldn't help but reflect on the moment. The wild had called to him, and he had answered. The foal, the herd, and the entire experience had opened his eyes to a deeper understanding of the natural world, a world that he had always loved but never truly understood. And as he looked out of the window, watching the forest fade into the distance, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. This was a journey he would never forget. As the foal grew stronger, Ethan felt an undeniable pull. Something was about to happen. The herd, led by Astrius, was waiting, but for what? Days passed, and the foal's condition slowly began to improve. The once fragile creature, trembling with fear and pain, had found solace in the warmth of the bus and the care of the tourists and Ethan. The soft hum of the engine, the gentle sway of the vehicle, and the kindness of those around it worked together like a quiet symphony of healing. The foal's coat, once matted with dirt and blood, now gleamed with a newfound vitality, and its breathing had become less shallow, more steady. Ethan watched it closely, feeling a sense of peace wash over him every time the foal lifted its head, its dark eyes meeting his. Each small sign of recovery was a victory, and as the days went by, the foal began to take tentative steps, testing its injured leg. At first, its movements were cautious, but slowly, the foal grew more confident. The trust it had placed in Ethan and the others was evident in every small act. Each step it took toward freedom was a testament to the bond they had forged. But as the foal regained strength, Ethan's thoughts often turned to the herd, to Astrius, and to the wild world that had called him into its fold. He knew that the foal's journey wasn't complete until it could return to its own kind, to the land it was meant to roam freely. It was a bittersweet realization, one that tugged at his heart. The foal had come to him as a wounded soul, and now it was ready to rejoin the world it had been separated from. Ethan's job was far from over. It was time for the next chapter of the story to unfold. One crisp morning, after a long night of careful observation and tending, Ethan felt a subtle shift in the air. The foal, now stronger and more alert, was standing near the bus, gazing out toward the open field that lay ahead. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken understanding between Ethan, the foal, and the land. It was time. Time for the foal to return to the wild, to the herd that had led him on this journey. As if sensing the same thing, the sound of hooves reached Ethan's ears. His heart skipped a beat. He stepped out of the bus, his eyes scanning the horizon, and then he saw them, Astrius, the leader of the herd, followed by the rest of the group, moving gracefully toward them. They were returning, just as they had done when they had guided him to the injured foal. There was no fear in the air, only a quiet understanding that this moment had been carefully orchestrated by nature itself. The foal, standing at Ethan's side, seemed to recognize its kin. Its ears pricked up, and it took a few tentative steps toward the herd. The moment was electric, an unspoken reunion between the foal and the herd. Astrius, with its powerful stride, led the way, his eyes locking with Ethan's in silent acknowledgement. The wild had come full circle, and now the foal would rejoin the land that had called it home. Ethan watched in awe as the foal, its wounds healed and its spirit restored, trotted toward the herd. The connection between the foal and its kind was palpable, and Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. The journey he had embarked upon was not just one of survival, it was one of deep, meaningful connection. Between the foal, the herd, and the wild world they inhabited, Ethan had become a part of something much larger than himself. As the herd circled around the foal, Astrius stood at the forefront, his powerful presence symbolizing the strength of nature itself. The herd, once more together, seemed to acknowledge Ethan and the tourists, the ones who had helped their young member survive. It was a moment of mutual respect, a moment where the line between human and animal, between the wild and civilization, had blurred and softened. Ethan stood quietly, watching the scene unfold before him. The foal, now in the safety of its herd, looked back one last time at Ethan, as if to say thank you, before turning and galloping into the vast open field, the wild calling it home once more. Ethan felt a rush of emotion flood over him as he watched the foal rejoin its family. The journey, the challenges, the fear, and the triumphs had all led to this moment. And as the herd faded into the distance, with Astrius leading them proudly, Ethan realized that he had witnessed something far greater than he could have ever imagined. He had seen the bond between nature and man, between life and survival, and how the wild, and all its unpredictable beauty, held secrets that only those brave enough to listen could truly understand. The tourists, moved by the sight, stood quietly beside him. Each of them had played a role in this remarkable journey, and they knew that the memories they carried from this experience would stay with them forever. As the last of the herd disappeared into the horizon, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. The wild had shown him its true power, and in return, he had given something back, a piece of trust, a gesture of humanity, a willingness to listen and to understand. The journey, for Ethan and the foal, had come full circle. The wild had tested him, had pulled him into its depths, and had allowed him to experience the profound connection that exists between all living things. And as he looked back at the receding figures of the herd, he understood, for the first time, that he was a part of that wild world. As the last sight of the herd faded into the distance, and the bus continued on its path, Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the journey they had just completed. The foal had returned to its own, the wild had revealed its mysterious power, and yet, something inside him stirred, a sense that there was still more to this story, something unfinished, something the land itself was whispering to him. He didn't know what it was yet, but he felt it deep within. As the days passed and the foal grew stronger, Ethan began to see something more than just physical recovery. The foal, once a trembling, fragile creature, had become a symbol, not just of survival, but of the wild's raw, indomitable will. It had overcome the odds, relying on something deep inside it, and it had found hope. Hope was a powerful thing. It was what kept both animals and humans going, even when the odds were against them. But Ethan knew that the foal's recovery wasn't just about saving a life, it was about something much larger. It was about the connection between humans and the wild, the unspoken bond between all living creatures. The foal had come to him for help, and now it had returned to its own kind, restored and healed. And in that moment, Ethan understood that he, too, had been healed. His understanding of nature, of the wild, had been changed forever. As the bus journeyed back down the winding path, Ethan turned to the tourists, who had been quietly reflecting on the journey. "What we witnessed today was far more than a story of survival," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of all that had happened. "It was about something deeper, the bond between man and nature, the trust that was shared between us and the wild. We saved a life, but we also learned about resilience, sacrifice, and the quiet power of hope. The foal, despite its wounds, found strength. And in that strength, it showed us that survival is not about avoiding pain, it's about enduring it and continuing to move forward." The tourists looked at him, understanding beginning to dawn on them. Ethan continued, "And remember, the horses, they are not just animals. They are a part of this world, of the wild that is often overlooked. They teach us lessons that no one else can, about strength, endurance, and the connections that bind us all, human and animal alike." The bus rolled on, the wilderness slipping away in the rearview mirror, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the journey. The forest, the herd, the foal, they had all shown him something far beyond what words could express. It wasn't just a journey of survival, it was a journey of connection, one that had opened his heart in ways he never expected. The tourists sat in silence, the weight of their experience settling in their hearts. They had come on a simple sightseeing trip, but what they had witnessed was something far more profound, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. As the bus continued down the road, Ethan glanced out the window, his thoughts drifting back to the herd, to the wild, and to the unspoken bond that tied all creatures together. He knew that the wild would always call to him, and perhaps, someday, he would return. But for now, the journey had come to an end. Or had it? The foal was gone, the herd had moved on, but something lingered. A question, a feeling, a connection that couldn't quite be explained. Ethan turned back to the tourists, seeing the spark of curiosity in their eyes. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to this world than they realized. And that, he thought, was a journey waiting to be discovered again. Life isn't always easy, but it's in these challenging moments that we discover our inner strength. The foal, despite its injuries, carried within it an unwavering will to live and a hope that never faded. This not only reminds us of the power of recovery, but also of the strength of trust. When we trust each other and trust nature, we can overcome anything. The story also highlights the importance of listening to and respecting nature. Like Ethan, we are not just passers-by in this world, we have a responsibility to understand and protect what is around us. Every creature, like the horse, has its role, and when we immerse ourselves in that world, we not only live, we learn the deeper lessons of love and sacrifice. Thus, the story isn't just about a physical journey, but also a journey of reconnecting with the natural world and the lasting values of humanity. Though the journey has ended, the lessons of resilience, sacrifice, and love for nature will forever resonate in the hearts of those who experienced it.